Welcome to Nieuw Rechts, or for our English listeners, New Right. My name is Daniel de Liever, and today we're going to talk about the political situation in Poland. For this important topic, I have the pleasure today to talk to Professor Frank Furedi. Thank you for being here today.
Pleasure, Daniel.
Even though I've interviewed you before, for those who don't know you, let me start with a short introduction. Frank Furedi is like a renowned sociologist, author, and media commentator, and he's an emeritus professor of sociology at the University of Kent in Canterbury, and author of more than 25 books. Additionally, he's also the managing director of the think tank MCC Brussels. And today we're going to talk about the report that MCC Brussels has done after some research of the political situation in Poland. Before we get into it, let me ask you, why did MCC Brussels actually do the research and bring out this report called Donald Tusk's Anti-Democracy Handbook?
I think we are very much concerned about the phenomenon of lawfare. That is the way in which the law is used as a political weapon to silence opposition. It's particularly used against the right, against conservatives. And we notice that there's a tendency within Europe to not only use the law against certain politicians, but in general as a way of altering the whole political environment. And we felt that Poland was a very sad example here, because with the election of the new government of Donald Tusk, you had essentially a complete disregard for the rule of law. And instead what you had was this systematic attempt to organize what is in effect a coup d'etat by changing the way in which the structures of Poland work, whether it's the media or cultural institutions or the courts, which is in a sense quite unprecedented, where you essentially make up the law as you go along. So that's why we felt it was important to expose these developments to a wider public.
Very important point, I think. And is there any relationship between MC Brussels and the political situation in Poland specifically?
Well, we have a lot of sympathy for the Polish people. You have to remember that being Hungarians and Poles have always had a sense of solidarity for centuries, going back historically. But especially, we felt that over the last 8 years, Poland and Hungary in particular were continually targeted by the European Union Commission. They were continually attacked for being anti-democratic, attacked for being corrupt, attacked for violating the rule of law. And therefore, we're particularly interested that whereas beforehand, the Commission was very much worried about the rule of law in the abstract, when it came to the very real violation of the rule of law in Poland over the last 6, 7, 8 months, there was complete silence. There's complete lack of interest in many of the things that were being done, which violated the legal norms of Polish society.
Yes, I must say I was quite shocked when I was reading this report. Of course, like I've told you before, there's not a lot of interest in the media on this topic. Of course, there's been a little bit of attention, but having this full summary of all the things that are happening is quite shocking. But before we dive into it, I was quite curious, like how was this research conducted in general in the report?
Well, the way it was conducted was that a couple of my colleagues went to Poland just to get a feel for it, a sensitivity for it. And we had some people, some parliamentarians and some lawyers come over from Poland and do an event with us one evening where they talked about the different dimensions of the problem. And then we basically asked the author of the report to do a more systematic work and just try to sort of basically go through all the different developments that occurred since the new government has come in, to bring to the surface the fact that it wasn't just one thing here or one thing there, but there was essentially a much more systematic assault on the democratic decision-making process in Polish society.
Has there also been contact with people from the current government of Donald Tusk in all of this?
I don't think that the current government of Donald Tusk is very much into having an open dialogue. Although I've talked to a few individuals myself who are pro-government, by and large, what we've done is we just, in terms of the research, try to talk to people involved in different institutions that have been affected by some of the changes that have occurred.
All right. And before we dive into it, I'm also curious why, like, there are a lot of people, of course, we're a Dutch media platform. Question I tend to ask is, why should people care about what's happening in Poland? They could say, okay, maybe it's bad what's going on there, but how would it affect common people in other European nations?
Well, look, if you look around Europe in the last year, you'll find that there's been a very interesting development, which is you'll find that the law has been mobilized to try to prevent Marine Le Pen from running for the presidency by taking her to court for what is a relatively trivial matter, and trying to make sure that she doesn't get a chance to run in the next presidential elections. You have a situation in Germany where the law is used in a very disturbing kind of a way to cut down on the freedom of speech of people, where magazines are being banned, and where, for example, if you criticize politicians like a Green or a social democratic politicians, for example, there are cases where people call them idiots. They get taken to court and, in many cases, imprisoned. There have been 1,200 examples for the last couple of years of people who've been tried under a law which they created. And the law says that if you make criticism that makes it difficult for politicians to carry out their duties, then they can take you to court and you can get a fine or imprisonment. So the attacks on free speech in Germany are very, very palpable. There's even talk now of banning the right-wing party, the ADF. So it is a very dangerous development. Of course, the worst thing that happened, which we need to think about, is the coup d'état that occurred in effect in Romania, where as a result of the most recent presidential election, the right-wing candidate who came first was told that his election is suspect, and the Constitutional Court decided to annul the results of the election. That's never happened before. And basically, we have a president of Romania whose period of office is gone, it's finished. He's still in office because the other candidates are not able to run because the election has been annulled because they didn't get the right result. So this can happen in Romania, in Germany, and in Poland. Then I think that if I'm fairly sure that the courts in the Netherlands and some of the people working for the state in Netherlands may well react in the same kind of anti-democratic way, hiding behind the law, weaponizing the law, and making sure that the political aspirations of people are thwarted in certain cases.
That's a good point. We already have seen, of course, we have like now the Geert Wilders with the Freedom Party in the Netherlands, who is like, let's say, being pushed around, to say it mildly, with, for example, immigration laws, etc., which, of course, we also see with Meloni in Italy. But still, if you now go to Poland, there's this view, especially in the Netherlands, that Donald Tusk is this moderate, right-wing politician compared to PiS, of course, who is seen as this corrupt party. This is the short summary. What do you think in general is wrong with this view of Tusk and in comparison with PiS?
Well, I think Donald Tusk is an interesting character because he's been around for a long time. He is like a product of the European Commission. He's very much their man. Although he is seen as a moderate or he's seen as a man of the left, I think politically he's an opportunist. I think what he likes is the federalist project of Brussels. He would like to promote federalism throughout Europe and does not think very highly of the concept of national sovereignty. Because he's Polish, he cannot go completely along with the arguments that are used in Brussels because, for example, in Poland, the pro-migration policies of the European Commission wouldn't go down well. So it's got to, in a sense, keep quiet about things like that. But essentially, if you can just imagine, Donald Tusk is a member of the technocratic managerial elite who's wants to impose a kind of globalist political vision upon Poland, one where the national sentiments, the national aspirations of the Polish people become diminished. He's very talented. He's a real operator, but at the same time, by the example that he's offered to us since his election, he demonstrated that not only does he lack any democratic instincts, he's also quite prepared to violate the most basic fundamental norms of constitutional democracy. And I think for that reason, it's very, very dangerous. He promotes his arguments by using two concepts. One of them is called militant democracy, and the other one is called transitional democracy. They both sound nice because they both have democracy in the phrase. But if you take militant democracy, what that means is that in order to defend democracy, as you see it, if you feel that democracy is being threatened by so-called anti-democratic forces, then you are given permission to behave anti-democratically. So basically, militant democracy gives the government the right, to continually and constantly trample over existing institutions, to ignore the procedures that have been in place for a long time, to essentially violate the independence of the judiciary, and to essentially go so far as to try to arrest people or to jail people that it doesn't really like.
And what do you think? One of the things that I noticed, indeed, he talks a lot about restoring the rule of law, restoring democracy in this sense, but he also makes a lot of comparisons to denazification, the Nuremberg trials, Yugoslavia tribunals. What do you think about the fact that he specifically uses this kind of language to legitimize his policy?
Well, I think that we live in an era where the phrase "just like Hitler" or "it's just like the 1930s" just trips off their tongue, because one of the ways in which you justify what are essentially anti-democratic authoritarian policies is by claiming that we're not living in 2024, but we're living in the middle of Nazi Germany in 1938 or 39. And they create this fantasy, this analogy with a situation that is entirely different, that was unprecedented and very, very unique. And they normalize that. So it's almost like they've broken down the temporal distinction between 2024 and 1939. They collapsed the two together as a way of basically suggesting that they are the bold and brave and democratic fighters of Nazism. But in fact, what's very interesting about it is that despite all their talk about fighting the fascists, they are using fascist methods to realize their objectives. So if anybody resembles what happened in the past, it's them rather than the other way around. And although I would never use the analogy, because I think as a sociologist, I'm always very suspicious when you basically say it's just like it was, because as you know, it's never just like it was. The world changes quite fundamentally. But nevertheless, that becomes the one singular legitimating argument that they're using time and time and time again, not just in Poland, but everywhere in Europe, to realize what are in fact anti-people, anti-democratic, anti-national, anti-patriotic sort of solutions.
I think one of those tactics that are very telling is also the way they deal with public media. In the report, it specifically talks about quote-unquote forcible takeover of public media. Can you describe this process a little bit for me?
Well, it is, what they essentially are committed to is to make sure that only one voice is heard on the media. I think they realized from, for example, the American election of Donald Trump and other situations, that if you have another media or a strong oppositional media, then that can create a problem, because that creates a debate. So what they've tried to do is to essentially ensure that all the media that is owned by the public comes under their domination, comes under their rule, and they essentially gone into the television sort of studios with the police, kicked out the people that were there beforehand, and put in their own people. What they're also doing now is they're trying to prevent the establishment of other TV companies from being owned by interest other than their own, by preventing, for example, their sale. The moment there's a big debate going on about a company that wants to sell their TV channels to a firm that is, not part of the government, and they're trying to pass a law that will prevent that, that kind of deal from coming through. So for them, I think they are basically saying that the media landscape has got to be, sort of Tuskian. Otherwise, they will be in trouble.
Do you think that then we can actually talk about a severe constitutional crisis that's going on now, or how would you describe the severity of what we're seeing already?
I think what we're saying there is a kind of softly kind of coup, where you systematically, what you're doing, for example, if you have a museum in Warsaw that's run by people that are not sympathetic to you, you basically get rid of the director first, put in your own person, then the new director gets rid of the people underneath, and bit by bit, you make all the people that had various jobs in a museum field or a educational field, you make them unemployed, and you just kind of bit by bit put in your own people, so that by the end of it, the party that's running the government is also running various public organizations and cultural organizations throughout Poland. And that does resemble a kind of softly coup that's occurring there.
The thing that I find very surprising is the fact that they're able to use like the legal system to do so. You would assume, of course, Poland has, let's say, throughout its history, that's many challenging times, of course. How is it possible that the legal system can be used in only a few months, basically, to make all these changes?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the legal system can only function if the judiciary is independent from the political system. That's one of the premise of a democratic society, that you keep the two as far away from each other as possible, so you don't these things don't overlap. But what Tusk has done, what the government has done in Poland, is to politicize the judiciary and juridify the political system, so the two become very much intertwined. And what they've done is essentially using a combination of pressure upon the judiciary, but also putting people in, and a justice minister in, who is totally hostile to the previous regime. You can basically corrupt the system of the judiciary to carry out your political decision. And in many respects, in the last 6 or 7 months, the justice ministry in Poland has been one of the most important institutions in terms of affecting these internal changes that has occurred.
And we see also that there are like key judicial bodies like the Constitutional Tribunal, National Council of the Judiciary, and some chambers even of the Supreme Court are now basically not recognized anymore by the government. What's the impact of the fact that even part of the legal system themselves are now, in some sense, become useless in the political landscape?
Well, they have this concept of transitional justice. And what that means that in order to make the transition to democracy, because their argument is that when they got in power, there was very little democracy. In order to make the transition to real democracy, then they have the authority to basically make up the law as it goes along. And that's more or less what they're doing. And that's unprecedented in many ways in recent European history, where you basically totally ignore the previous precedents, the legal precedents that have occurred in the name of the transition you're making. And they are very clear about it. They basically say that in order for us to uh, establish a democratic society with a democratic judiciary, we have to ignore the institutions like the Supreme Court and various other bodies until the transition is completed.
It's still kind of surprising because you could say, right, that if you start doing this, at some point, if you lose power, let's say a PiS government comes back in, then they also now have the president that they can disregard court rulings and whatnot. So how can people in Poland, just in general, accept this? This is something that is hard to understand because people must be seeing, right, that things are changing in a bad manner.
I think you raise a very important question. I haven't got the answer for that. I think that there is a kind of disconnection that has occurred, and that there are. See, Poland's become a very polarized society, where the people that support the government really hate the PiS and the political party that was in power beforehand, and vice versa. It is a bit like in the United States in that respect, very polarized. And therefore, the supporters of the government don't care. As far as they're concerned, this is okay because, they really are smashing the party and the people that they don't like. And the people that are pro-government, I think to some extent have become demobilized and are finding their way. They sometimes react. When, for example, there was an attempt to ban a demonstration on Poland's National Day, the people said, no, we're not going to put up with that. There was a big demonstration on the streets of Warsaw and other cities. But by and large, I think for now, people are a little bit demobilized. But the way that I see the situation, this is not going to last, sort of indefinitely, because I think when people realize the long-term serious consequences, the changes that have occurred, they kind of begin to react. At the moment, people are not directly touched by changes to the directorship of a museum or changes to the media or to a newspaper or an institution. That is not something they feel directly at the moment. But the minute that this kind of the momentum of this continues, I think that will provoke much more of a reaction later on.
I hope so, I guess, because the longer it takes, of course, the longer it also will take to restore certain things. I'm quite curious what you also think. There, of course, also has been a lot of criticism before, especially more on the left, of potential corruption or abuse of power on the side of the PiS government that we had before. Do you think there's any merit in that criticism?
I think there is some merit in the fact that the previous government, I would criticize them for not thinking of the long run. If you're a conservative government, you got to assume that at some point you're going to lose an election. And if you're going to lose an election, you got to ask the question, what happens the day after that? And to do that, you have to strengthen your institutions. You have to maybe even set up your think tanks, your alternative institutions, so to make sure that if you lost power, at least there are bodies around that can promote your ideas. I think they didn't think of that at all, and therefore what's happened is that the day after the election, they all realized that they got nothing left. Many of them are unemployed who were linked to the government, and they have nowhere to go because there's no institutions that will take them. So they're a big financial and material problems. So I think that was a problem, and I also think that in the election campaign, they assumed that they will win in a way that was unrealistic. They should have fought. I mean, it's easy for me to say from the outside, but when I looked at their campaign, I felt that this was very patchy and very ineffective, and therefore I wasn't surprised at all that they lost the election, because they really somehow lost the capacity to inspire people, even their own base and people outside of their own base.
That might be true, but it's still a little bit different from like the charges of like the fact like what a lot of people say nowadays is yes, maybe what Tusk is doing is wrong, but it's quite similar to what the PIS party was doing. This is, I think, the biggest accusation that people have against the previous government.
I don't know. I mean, the previous government, I thought, was made a very decent attempt
Mm-hmm.
to run Polish society. I think they behaved in a way, even though they were criticized for breaking the rule of law by the European Commission.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they tried to make sure that there was a very clear separation of the legal and the political domain.
Mm-hmm.
They were much more following the rules. I mean, that's incomparably. You cannot compare the two.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's wrong to say that they were just the Tusk regime Mark One, because obviously, if you're in government, you're going to try to put pressure on institutions to make sure that your own view of the world gains influence. I mean, everybody does that, but that's very different than breaking those institutions and forcing those institutions to basically carry out your own sort of outlook on the world. So there's a bit of a difference between the two. I mean, my only criticism of that isn't what they did; it's what they didn't do. What I'm concerned about.
That's a fair point. And you already mentioned the European Commission. It's strange, but so many, even if you would not believe that these things are bad that are happening, at least we can notice, let's say from a neutral point of view, that a lot of things are changing. And it's weird that the European Commission is dead silent on any of this. And why do you think that is the case?
Well, I think the European Commission is an imperial institution. They regard Europe as their little colonies or potential colonies. And they regard Tusk as their collaborator, as their man in Warsaw. And therefore, they are quite permissive in allowing Tusk to do whatever he thinks should be done. And they have always had a double standard between their friends and what they see as their enemies. So the decision that they made and the criticism they made, for example, of the old Polish government is very different than of Tusk.
Yes.
I mean, Tusk gets a free pass for everything in a way that the old Polish government wouldn't. And I think that we have to remember that the Commission is anything but a neutral body. They themselves are highly political, and they are trying to ensure that their federalist vision, their anti-sovereigntist vision, gains as much influence as possible throughout Europe.
Yes, I think you all see this double standard that we talked about, for example, with what's happening in Germany. Of course, another country that gets a lot of criticism is Hungary, where they try to make it seem that there's a lot of like repression of freedom of speech. But when it actually happens with, let's say, a lot of proof in Germany, when you have a social democratic leader there, then the commission is dead silent as well. So
yes, I mean, it's astounding. I mean, if you call a politician in Budapest, in Hungary, an idiot,
yes,
it's ignored. Nobody thinks it's a big deal. Right? You call a politician in Germany an idiot, and there's always a possibility that a Green member of parliament will take you to court, and there's a possibility you will get fined or even put in jail. So it is interesting that Germany is allowed a kind of authoritarian sort of orientation towards freedom, what I call democratic backsliding, which sort of is not criticized, but even the slightest hint that something is not 100% right in Hungary will be blown up and seen as a kind of reminder that Budapest is becoming just like the Weimar Republic. Sort of.
Yes, that's exactly what they're trying to do. But the thing that we know already for a long time that the European Commission moves in a certain way. But what I find surprising is that also other nations and politicians also seem to not put a lot of focus in speaking out for Poland. Why is that the case, you think?
Either because they don't think that what's happening in Poland is important, they don't understand the gravity of the situation, or alternatively is because they are sympathetic to what Tusk is doing. So you have to remember, if you're Macron in France or Scholz in Germany, and you have problems yourself domestically, then you basically identify much more with Tusk than with anything else, and you will regard Tusk's behavior as not that important, because as far as you're concerned, he is protecting a way of life that they themselves subscribe to. So I think there is a kind of connection between some of these individuals, which means that they don't criticize each other, they don't question each other, and they're, the last thing they want to do is to make life difficult for one of their mates.
And like in the past, you have been, I would say, fairly critical of, let's say, progressive worldview, and also opposing that on other countries. How does, let's say, the current things that Tusk is doing in Poland, how is that related to, let's say, the progressive agenda, if I may call it this way?
I don't know. I think what Tusk, I think the importance of Tusk is to remove a very important obstacle to the globalist project of the European Union. I mean, Tusk is one of those individuals who is really very important in that kind of general globalist political hierarchy. So he's not just simply a Polish politician, but he's a global player. It says, from their point of view, is very, very important. And I think if you can neutralize Poland effectively, and you can then move on and try to neutralize some of the populist leaders in Europe, eventually you'll be able to do the same in Slovakia, and Hungary is also a target, a very important target there, which is receiving a lot of that kind of attention. Then it becomes easier for the federalist project in Europe to prevail and to gain far greater hegemony. So, in that sense, there is a move afoot to kind of capitalize on that. That's why you have to remember that what's happening in Romania with the coup d'etat there is linked to what's happening in Poland, and the way that the legal system is used in Europe. And it's very important to realize how important is the politicization of the legal system is that's one of the main weapons to try to homogenize this kind of more progressive sort of federalist agenda, and to try to give it hegemonic influence.
And if people are looking at this and they're thinking, okay, this is very important. We need, especially, of course, we have more right-wing people watching this from our website. If they say, okay, I want to do something to maybe help Poland, to speak out on it, what can people do in this situation from the outside?
I think what they can do is to really raise awareness about what's happening in Poland in all kinds of means, through personal contact, but also by trying to use the social media. You have to remember that the social media is really important. It made it possible for Trump to win in America. I think the lesson that I would draw from the Polish experience, if I was living in the Netherlands, is that we need to make sure that our efforts to build our own institutions, our own media, is redoubled, and try to kind of extend the influence that we have, because these kind of things might, isn't just simply about raising awareness about Poland, but it's also to warn people that what happened in Poland can happen in Amsterdam. There's no reason why Netherlands is going to be immune from these kinds of influences. So I think that what people can do is to play a role in institution building and raising discussions of this in their own circles, and to use Poland as a negative example of what can happen in our world today. Because let me tell you one thing: the situation is going to get worse in Poland in the short run before it gets better.
What do you think will happen, and what can people imagine of how bad it can get if nothing changes in the short term?
I think that in the short term, I will see a lot more repression. I think that we're now moving to the stage where they will try to eliminate opposition politicians. They will try to neutralize them in one way or the other, and they will clamp down even more on the freedoms that they still have. So I do worry about the state of democracy in Poland, unless there's a kind of fight back against it.
Let's hope that that the situation in Poland can change, that it will indeed get better, and that we can move back to some sort of actual democracy in Poland and in other countries in the European Union where this is under attack.
I agree with you, Daniel, and I'm sure it will happen. I'm optimistic that it's only a matter of time before our world will change for the better.
I'm happy to hear. I must say, funny enough, a lot of people I talk to that I interview, I ask them in the end for if they're hopeful or not, and I would say most of them actually are not that hopeful. So I'm happy to hear that you are you are a little bit more hopeful.
I am. I look around and I see, a lot of positive developments. So even in Poland, there's a movement called Confederacja, which is attracting a lot of young people to the right. So I think that our day will come, but it's not going to come if we just simply sit back. It's going to come if we go out and fight for it.
That's a very beautiful end to this interview. If people want to follow more of your work, where can they do that?
I got a Substack, and it's called Roots and Wings with Frank Furedi. I mean, I suggest you subscribe to it. It's quite an interesting, I hope it's quite an interesting platform. And also, if you want to check me out, look at frankfuredi.org, and you can see on my website some of my writings and things about what I'm really doing in this world of ours. But also, keep an eye out on MCC Brussels, our think tank, which I think is playing a very important role. I say that without being arrogant, that we're playing a very important role in fighting back in the culture wars against the European Commission.
Thank you so much. And I also want to thank our listeners and readers. If you want to support us and make more of these conversations possible, then also subscribe to us at nieuwrechts.nl. And I will see you in the next one.